In today's show, what the Portland Trailblazers can learn from the two teams in the NBA Finals, taking a closer look at Denver and Miami and what Portland needs to do to follow that path. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter Mike Richmond. You're listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. Start your days with it. Make it a part of your daily routine. Tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, we're going to take a closer look at the Miami Heat and the Denver Nuggets and kind of parse out some lessons the Blazers can learn. I think the specifics, in general, I think this is sort of a played out trope, but it's May 30th, y'all. Your boy needs some content. But I think it is easy to say what the Blazers need is they need freaking Nikola Jokic, right? They need the best player in the NBA. It's the best way to make the NBA Finals is have the best dude playing, right? But I think there are more sort of specifics, both broad and granular, about these two teams that kind of give us a sense of what team building for really good teams has to look like. What is the sort of required of good teams, the sort of the requisite attributes of teams that make it this deep into the playoffs, because that's where the Blazers fancy themselves being. If everything works out for the Blazers, what they want to do is they want to get, I don't know if the NBA Finals is realistic or anything, but they want to be, I don't think it's realistic, let me be clear. I do not think they can go from where they were this year to the NBA Finals, but they fancy themselves being a competitive, good, in the mix type of playoff team, and I think there was enough kind of flawed teams that got deep into the playoffs this year in the West that you could talk yourselves into the Blazers being competitive, even if the ultimate goal seems pretty far away. But what I want to do in today's show is talk about the lessons that the Heat and the Denver Nuggets offer us, as well as a little haters guide. We got to talk about Jaylen Brown. We're legally obligated to fantasize about Jaylen Brown. A little Jaylen Brown fan fiction coming up in the third segment. But first, let's learn some lessons. The number one lesson I feel like I've learned from watching Miami and Denver roll into the NBA Finals. Miami didn't really roll. They were rolling into the NBA Finals, and they lost 3 in a row and survived in Game 7 on Monday on their home floor. Survived by beating the snot out of Boston, but just by virtue of making it to Game 7, they had to survive. The Celtics went to Topgolf. They were united by Topgolf, and Miami was able to overcome them by, thanks in part to Jason Tatum rolling his ankle and just the Heat are just really stinking good. And what you need to be this good, this deep, is depth. And let me be clear about this. Denver is playing 7 dudes basically in the playoffs, a little bit of Christian Brown here and there. 7.25 players, because Brown doesn't play much. Even when he plays, he gets 2 4-minute shifts or something like that, if he even gets a second one. Sometimes he plays 5 minutes in the first half, and that is your Christian Brown. That is your Christian Brown experience. Come in, get some rebounds, play competitive defense, pick up a couple fouls, peace out. You might not even get a shot off. Nuggets are basically going 7 deep, but they are interchangeable beyond the Jokic and Jamal Murray pairing. How they close games depends on who's rolling and what the matchup dictates. Sometimes it's Uncle Jeff Green. Often it's Bruce Brown. Sometimes it's KCP. But when it's not KCP, sometimes they've gone bigger and gone with Aaron Gordon and MPJ and just gone really big, and Bruce Brown in there as well. There was a game in that Lakers series in the Western Conference Finals when the Lakers had just basically said, okay, we're straight up not going to guard Aaron Gordon, and they couldn't figure out where to put him, right? The dunker spot didn't really work because it allowed Anthony Davis to help too easily on Jokic. The corner didn't really work because Gordon isn't a bomb away 3-point shooter. He's not a terrible 3-point shooter, but he's just not a threat out there to the point that playoff level defenses are getting broken by his threat to shoot. You'll live with that in the playoffs. If he makes it, you lose, but whatever, you live with it. And so Michael Malone just said, fine, we'll put Jeff Green in there. And Jeff Green, a better shooter from the corners, it just worked. It was just straight up that move sorry, checkmate. Like giving Jokic another option, another player that you have to deal with, another sort of part of the geometric equation. It's like, dang it, the corner's open now too. It's just, they were too hard to guard and they rolled. Like they crushed them because of the willingness to play different parts. So you don't need to necessarily be like deep and 11 deep to get into this playoff run, but you need 7 dudes who can for sure play at the highest level. And that might mean that some of them are flawed, right? Like KCP, I feel like hasn't missed any shots in the playoffs, but he's not always the guy because he's not dynamic off the dribble, and he's not as big as sort of the other options, and he can't run another, like Bruce Brown can play a little point guard in the way that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope cannot. So like even with like players who are really good, when their flaws show up, be able to switch out and have those sort of multiple looks. You need to be, 7 legitimate high leverage, we can play type of players. And you look at the Heat, same type of like super valuable depth. They're just playing 7 deep now too, right? They've played a little bit of Cody Zeller and a little bit of Kevin Love, 2 Oregonian legends. Big, handsome, and K-Love. But like, so they've gone 9 deep at times. Haywood Highsmith has played a little bit in these playoffs, but basically they're playing 7 dudes with Lowry and Duncan Robinson off the bench. Duncan Robinson didn't play all year. But then when Tyler Hero got hurt in the first round of the opening round and Victor Oladipo got hurt in the opening round, it just like, hey, Duncan, you got to play, dog. Like, you hope you stayed ready because now you need to be ready. And that depth that allows them just to like keep coming in waves with competent players has allowed Miami to survive. Now, to be clear, let's be 100% clear about this. The 2 best players in the playoffs this year have been Jimmy Butler and Nikola Jokic. You do not make the finals without top-end talent. Absolutely. It's a talent league. You do not make the NBA finals without stars, without your stars playing like stars. Jimmy willed Miami to some wins this year. Just said, come on. It's Himothy, and you are gonna ride on the Cape. But you could argue Caleb Martin was the best player in the Eastern Conference Finals. Like, he was freaking great. Max Strus has had some really good games. Gabe Vincent has been stunningly good, and part of the impressive comebacks that they've had have been just like Gabe Vincent being fearless down the stretch, and at times like their crunch time excellence is so much of Jimmy Butler, but it's driven by everyone else. Nikola Jokic has been great, but Jamal Murray has been an exceptional sidekick, and then the interchangeable depth really matters behind that incredible 2-man game. Depth matters. I think one of the challenges for the Blazers, to bring it back to the Blazers as this is Locked On Blazers specifically, is like they're trying to make some moves, but they're talent poor enough such that they need to either really nail some moves on the margins, like a draft pick that can play right away at a high level, which is really unlikely. It's just like rookies. It is very rare for rookies to be like high level contributors, but certainly there's enough examples to suggest that it's possible. Or just like the minimum signings or the whatever mid-level type of money they end up using, depending on where they end up tax-wise. Like, you got to nail those. Those have to be contributors. You can't have a Gary Payton situation where it's like, oh, whoops, the big contract we gave out didn't work and we are worse for it. It's like, they got to nail those parts because they're just not talent. They're just kind of talent poor on the back half of the rotation. It's either that or someone who we don't expect to takes a leap into being a high-level impact player. It's like, oh, Trendon Watford's really good now. And we'll see. I'm a big Trendon Watford fan, but I'm not a big believer in him being like a high-level playoff impact player from what we've seen so far in his first 2 seasons. And it's okay. He's an undrafted guy. It's like, it's baby steps. And he's, already got himself a guaranteed contract or an NBA contract in the league. And it's very specifically not guaranteed. But I think one of the challenges for Portland is even if they're able to make trades 1, 2, and 3 to get a little bit closer, the depth needed to compete deep into the playoffs, like 7 really good dudes, is tough. And this is like assuming that Shaedon Sharpe is, you could count him in the 7. If you can't, right, because he's going to be 20 years old and it's hard. It's a challenging league. Then it's like just their quest gets even more challenging. But to win at the highest level, you need depth. You know what else you need to win at the highest level? You need to use all of the tools available to you. I think this time of year is the time of year that people say, like, you got to do this, this is how Miami does it. This is how you build a perfect roster. This is how Denver does it. This is how you build a perfect roster. And let me tell you, You have to use all the tools available to you because neither of these teams make the finals if they say this is the only way we build. Let's talk about roster construction as it pertains to the finals teams and the Trailblazers in the second segment. But first, you want to go to a sporting event this week in Portland? How about going see the Portland Thorns take on Angel City FC? That's the NWSL team down there in Los Angeles. They're coming up to Portland. They're going to take on our beloved Thorns here at Providence Park. And for just $33, you can sit downstairs at Providence Park and watch the game. If you want to spend a little more money, $60 to sit on the north end at Providence Park, be in there with the die-hard fans, and get 2 tickets to see a really fun game. And that's all by getting last-minute tickets using the Gametime app. You don't have to plan months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. So on Wednesday, you decide you want to go, download that Gametime app or go to gametime.co and get deals to go see a soccer match or whatever it might be throughout wherever you're listening to this. Sports, concerts, comedy, live theater, whatever it is. Plus the Gametime guarantee means you always get the best price. So if you find tickets in the same section, the same row for less, you're going to get 110% of the difference. Gametime's going to give you money for finding a better deal. So snag tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app. Create an account. Use that promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and use the redemption code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right. Let's talk more about lessons from the teams that are in the NBA Finals. Here's the thing. When you get to this stage, there is a certain desire or just instincts for mimicry, right? Is to say like, okay, how'd they do it, right? Well, one of these teams drafted a 2-time and maybe should have been 3-time MVP, the freaking 42nd pick in the NBA draft. You're not going to do that. You're just not going to do it. And then their other two stars, Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray, are like late lottery picks. Like it's a lot of luck, right? It's a lot of luck. But you need all of it. You need the draft. You need free agency. You need trades. To wit, in free agency, without free agency, the Miami Heat do not get Jimmy Butler. Now, Jimmy Butler was a part of a sign and trade, but the reason he was part of a sign and trade is because he was leaving Philly. He was like, I'm out. I'm an unrestricted free agent. I'm leaving. And Philly said, okay, well, can we get something out of this? And Miami was already making a deal with your Portland Trailblazers to send Hassan Whiteside here to Portland that was going to give them the right type of cap space that they were going to be able to make it happen. And they ended up making it into a 4-team trade, and Jimmy Butler was traded there. But what he did was he signed in free agency with the Heat. And then the Sixers said, well, at least can we get a Josh Richardson out of the deal? Dang it, he's leaving. Free agency matters. The Heat, for as good as they are at the other stuff, their top-end talent, their absolute star, came via free agency, a 4-year, $185 million contract. You got to do it in free agency, either at the top of the roster like Miami did or at the bottom of the roster. As I mentioned, Denver obviously built their core through the draft, but where would they be without Bruce Brown? Did they sign with a taxpayer mid-level exception? He has been a game changer. Like he has been fantastic for them and a bargain type of guy who's like going to go make more money this summer in free agency, be it from Denver or somewhere else, because of how valuable he was. They just absolutely nailed it. So if you draft at the top and then sign guys to big contracts like Murray and Jokic and MPJ all have, then free agency has to come on the margins like Bruce Brown. Or if you do what the Heat did and have like all undrafted role players, more on that in a second, like then you got to sign players that can help using free agent money like Jimmy Butler and like Kyle Lowry, who Kyle Lowry was not very good in the Eastern Conference Finals, but he was really, really had some moments, particularly in the second round of the playoffs, where it's like, you're not winning without Kyle. You're just straight up not winning without Kyle. He has been that good. Like, he put the Knicks away, and he was darn solid. It's his contract's a little bloated now, but he's 37. Like you give yourselves a chance. You're in the finals because of it. So you need to use free agency. You need to use the tools in the draft. You need to draft players and develop them. If you look at the Denver Big Three, like I mentioned, like Jokic drafted, Jamal Murray drafted, Michael Porter Jr. drafted. Michael Porter Jr. is a role player, but he's getting paid, he's on a giant contract. Like he's a core part of their future, right? And he's come back from a bunch of injuries. He's been really good. He's morphed himself into a much more competitive defensive player, a better rebounder. He's just solid as heck now, right? Like it worked for him, and it worked for him because you drafted him. You could be patient developing him. You could give him a big contract and let him grow. The draft matters. Like the Jokic thing is just impossible to duplicate. I don't even obviously they get credit for it. I'm not trying to take away Denver's credit, but it's just the idea that it's just nail a pick in the 40s and draft an all-time great. Jokic is probably one of the 30 best players to ever play in the league or something like that. I'm bad at ranking, but he's really that good. He's freaking an all-timer. You're just not going to find dudes at 40 like that, in the 40s like that. It's just deeply unlikely, but you can nail the draft. It matters. Or if you're Miami, it's all about development. It's finding the Max Struses, finding the Duncan Robinsons, finding the Caleb Martins. Martin played for another team before that, but these are undrafted guys who went to Sioux Falls and played for the Sky Force in South Dakota, went to the Miami Heat's special little incubator program. They use the G League and develop players develop undrafted players better than anyone else in the league. So when they've spent a ton of money on top-end talent, their back-end talent, the players that fill out the back half of the roster, those are where the draft and development program really pays off, because Caleb Martin is freaking great, because Gabe Vincent won them some series, because Duncan Robinson's we're going to dust you off and you're going to be money because you can play. You have to use the tools and you have to use trades. Where would Denver be? So you got to use free agency, you got to use the draft, you got to use trades. Where would Denver be without Aaron Gordon, without Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, right? The Gordon pick is or the Gordon trades is Bol and a draft pick, and RJ Hampton, who was at the time the low 20s, I think 21st in the draft, but a youngster who was with the upside. He's and KCP, they traded Will Barton, a mainstay, and Monty Morris for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope for another role player that fit perfectly into the puzzle. They kind of punted on having a point guard, knowing that Jamal Murray was coming back from this injury and knowing that they didn't have anyone else. Said, Ish Smith will work, and if we don't have Ish Smith, Bruce Brown will play point guard. Monty Morris had been just held it down for them, never turning the ball over, and been really solid on good teams in Denver. And they flipped him to upgrade the roster in the right way. You have to do all of it. You have to do all of it. You have to do all of it. Free agency, either at the top or the bottom. Draft, either at the top or the bottom of the roster. And then trades to make the right moves to get you there. There is, I think this is sort of in the Blazers fan zeitgeist, that right now the Blazers have to either pick whether they are a team that builds through the draft or a team that builds through trades, and there is a right way and a wrong way. And I do think the Blazers are probably in a situation where they should just move to build through the draft and be more pragmatic, because they kind of back themselves into this corner with for a variety of reasons. Goes into the last 4 episodes I've done. I talked more about this in general, but you whatever tools are, if you're trying to be a good team, you got to do all of it. You have to draft well. You have to be player in free agency. Like I said, at the top of the bottom of the roster. Blazers in this cycle would be the bottom of the roster, right? Because they've already paid the top half of the roster, and then they've got to nail draft picks, and they've got to nail free agent, and they've got to nail trades. You have to use all the tools. Neither of these teams makes the NBA Finals without using all of the tools. I think the cycles that each team is in kind of explains it. The Miami Heat cleared cap space. They had drafted Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo, but those two dudes alone are not getting you into the playoffs even, right? The reason that they're really good is because of free agency, and the reason that they're sustainable is because of the draft. And the Nuggets, you flip it. The reason that they're really good is because of the draft, and the reason that they're sustainable is because of trades and really smart free agent moves. You got to use all the tools. You can't use just one path. You got to use all of it. That is the lesson to learn from these two teams in the playoffs. I can't wait for Thursday when that kicks off. The NBA Finals kickoff, Game 1 in Denver. your brain says like the Nuggets are going to roll this team, but I have watched Miami play too many games that I thought they were going to lose over the last 8 weeks for me to actively pick against them here on the podcast. So I'll just say Denver looks like a better basketball team, and if Miami ends up holding a trophy at the end, it'll just be a really special run. Okay. Remember the Haters Guide? If you're an everyday listener, you will. Shout out to my everydayer. The Haters Guide was something I introduced at the beginning of the playoffs, was how to root against every team in the playoffs. One of the ways to root against the Boston Celtics was hope that it blew up. They got a little bit, and it got a little messy, and they didn't want to pay Jaylen Brown, and all of a sudden he was available on the trade market. Well, it didn't totally blow up like it looked like it was going to for a second there. Last week, it looked like it was really going to blow up. The Haters Guide was getting pretty excited over here. True haters were excited. But let's indulge in a little Jaylen Brown fan fiction, a little Jaylen Brown dreams and what it would look like or what it could look like for the Blazers. Join me, haters, in the third segment, won't you? Still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond. You're still listening to Locked On Blazers. The Celtics season is done, and they're entering a very interesting summer when both of their best players are eligible for gigantic contract extensions. They're eligible for the designated veteran extensions. These are known as the Supermax. You can only get the Supermax from your team that drafts you. You can't change teams. You're only eligible for the Supermax if you hit some criteria that are related to All-NBA or winning MVP. It is something that the Celtics and Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have earned the right to sign a contract, and the Celtics, by virtue of drafting really good dudes and keeping them on the roster, have earned the right to offer these giant contracts. But it'd be $600 million total money given out to the Jays. And you might say, they can't do it. They can't do it. And to that, I say, look how many freaking times they make the Eastern Conference Finals. This team is good. Jason Tatum's 24. Jaylen Brown's 26. It's totally fine if they run it back. But after watching the way the Celtics season ended, and Jaylen Brown had a stinker in Game 7. Like he was almost like performance art bad. He was so awful. Jason Tatum twisted his ankle like literally the first play of the game, and they needed JB to take him home. They needed Jaylen Brown to be the guy who was like, okay, this is why I'm the number 2 on a championship team, because I'm capable in Game 7 when we're at home to to be the one who guides us through it. And he wasn't. He turned the ball over 8 times. He took some terrible shots early. He took some terrible shots late. He just struggled. That said, I still think he's an excellent basketball player, and the Celtics will have an interesting decision. There's no negotiating. He's eligible for that designated veteran extension, so if they don't offer him a Supermax contract, he's going to leave anyways. There's no negotiating. It's binary on this. Like, you either offer him the contract or you don't, and if you don't, he will enter next season on a lame duck season, one year remaining, and then be an unrestricted free agent following that. It's dicey, because if you commit all this money to the Jays, like, you're going to be really good. They've been really good and really successful, but there is some concern that at the highest levels, that the Jays don't complement each other enough, and their weaknesses are similar enough that they don't put the sort of stress on a defense in the way that maybe players that had more complementary A and B skills could. And quite frankly, Jaylen Brown just can't dribble well enough to be a true top-line star. He's a really good basketball player. So what if the Celtics go into the summer and they say, whew, we don't want to do it. We're not offering the Supermax. Let's explore the trade market. The Blazers are going to be on the phone. You better believe it. Jaylen Brown's a former Goodwin. He didn't really have a agent coming out of college, but he had an agent for stuff like shoes. Like, he didn't have a contract agent. He had a marketing agent, and his agent was the Goodwins, Aaron and Eric Goodwin, who are Dame's longtime agents, Oakland, California's own. Same agency, known each other forever. I think it's been reported by Josh Lloyd specifically of Locked On Fantasy Basketball that Jaylen Brown is a name that the Blazers have their eye on. If it comes to it, the package is pretty obvious. It would be Anthony, oh my goodness, Anthony Simons and the number 3 pick and the salary to make it work, and something like Nasir Little. I do not think the Blazers would trade Ant and Shaedon Sharpe for Jaylen Brown. Quite frankly, I think there's a world in which pretty easy path to believe that trading Simons and number 3 would be like regrettable in the end, right? I don't think you have to go too far down that road to like say like, woof, that might not be a good plan. But I want to think about it from the other side. Would Boston even accept that trade? I think it's enough a step back in talent, and like 3 is it's a really valuable pick. They're in a championship type cycle, not in a, hey, this dude's going to be really good in 2 years type cycle. Like they don't want to take a step back. They want to stay at this level and go forward. I'm not even sure Boston would accept that trade, even recognizing that it might be an overpay from Portland's end. Like this is like why trades are tricky, right? From the Blazers' perspective, it's probably a little too much in terms of like, it's not probably a little too much. It could be viewed as too much. I actually think it's like fine. Even if it might be regrettable, it's fine. But like for the Blazers, it might be like, ooh, that's steep. That's a high asking price. I think that's a better way to phrase it. And from the Celtics side, they say that's not enough. That's not what we want. It is the curious case of how NBA trades are born. And I think that is sort of part of the struggle. But like, let's say it happens, right? Anthony Simons, Nazir Little, the number 3 pick, the rights of Brandon Miller that goes to Boston, and you get Jaylen Brown. It doesn't immediately propel the Blazers into championship quality, but Dame, Jaylen Brown, and Jeremy Grant, with however they fill out the roster, is a very competitive team. Jaylen Brown's really good. I've kind of seen, if you hang out on the internet enough, you'll see this sort of take that's like the Blazers should only trade number 3 for an elite wing. Well, let me tell y'all. That's what Jaylen Brown is. Even a dude who can't dribble with his left hand and doesn't pass. That's what an elite wing looks like. Like, if you were describing an elite wing as only Giannis Antetokounmpo, well, just like put it away. That's not like, that trade ain't happening. But this is what an elite wing looks like in the league. That's what Jaylen Brown is. He's an excellent basketball player, even with his warts that particularly show up at the highest levels. The Celtics straight up, flamed out in the NBA Finals last season because Klay Thompson started guarding Jaylen Brown and sitting on his right hand and said, you got to dribble left. In the NBA, in the Eastern Conference Finals this year, the pressure defense against Jaylen Brown when he had to dribble was enough to take him out of getting shots and getting to his spots he wanted. The dude has flaws, and yet he's an excellent basketball player. That's kind of the risk you are taking if you're the Blazers. It's kind of just how it is. Like, I don't even think this trade's going to happen, but like, just to walk it out with you, like I said, fan fiction, it's like this would make them better, and they would need to make other moves. They need to use the other tools, as mentioned previously in the episode, to get to the next step. I think there would be reason to be hesitant on both sides. I think Boston would just straight up reject it, but I think there's reason to be hesitant on both sides. But if you're in favor of the Blazers going for it, it's hard to imagine a player much better than Jaylen Brown landing on your team. 26 years old, he's going to be, obviously you'd get the wink and the nod. You wouldn't make the trade without the wink and the nod that like he's going to sign a giant contract with you and not eligible for Supermax, but just a regular max contract, which is still a ton of money, but it's like $190 million, not $285 million. Bummer for Jaylen Brown to lose out on the $100 million. That's the price you pay for changing scenery. So like wink and a nod that you pay him, you have an extremely expensive roster, and you're pretty darn good, right? It's just, I think this is kind of what I'm thinking about from the lessons from the first two teams. It's like first two segments, rather. It's like, you need depth, and you need to do a bunch of different things to build a championship roster. And even if the Blazers were to make this home run trade, they would still need other moves to get really into that upper echelon. It's why they find themselves in a really challenging position. Quite frankly, the more I do this podcast and think about these scenarios, I just think like, I don't know that the Blazers can build themselves into I don't think they can build themselves into an inner circle contender, even off-season plus trade deadline. But even like the outer circle contenders, okay, this is one of the 9 best teams in the league. If things go the right way, they could be the Miami Heat or whatever. It's just, you need a lot. You need to do a lot. And I think like step 1, pipe dream of Jaylen Brown is a really good first step if you're trying to get aggressive and go for it right away. And even then, you would need steps 2, 3, 4, and 5 to really solidify yourself. It's a challenge, and I think it's what makes this offseason so fascinating, because the Blazers have kind of put their cards out there. It's like they want to make the big swings, but it's going to be one big swing and then you got to hit 2 doubles behind it, right? Like you need someone to homer to lead off the inning, and then you need the bats to keep going because you got to keep the rally going because you're down by several runs here. But I think it's what makes this next month and then free agency right behind it are going to be so fascinating for the Blazers, because they need to pick a path and they need to make some real steps along that path. So what better place to follow that path than Locked On Blazers? Tell your friends about the show, coming at you every single weekday. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.